I've never been particularly fond of the French. I think baguettes suck, their language sounds made up, and the Eiffel Tower isn't that impressive. As an American, it is part of my civic duty to have a certain amount of disdain for the country of France. However, my opinion on France has begrudgingly changed after playing a truly beautiful game. That game is Clair Obscur Expedition 33. When I first heard the title of this game, I honestly thought it sounded kind of pretentious and stupid. Clair Obscur. Do you really expect me to say that? But don't let the weird fancy title scare you. Sometimes people will call certain things and works of art pretentious because they present themselves as deeper and much more complex than they truly are. For example, the famous banana duct tape to a wall modern art exhibition that sold for $6 million titled Comedian. Many people found this incredibly pretentious since it presented itself as an extremely valuable work of art. However, most people found it incredibly stupid and not at all thought-provoking. So my initial interpretation of Clair Obscur was that this game was just another artsy turn-based RPG with an overly artistic sounding title so that it could seem more interesting than it actually was. But I'll be the first to admit, this game cannot be called pretentious, as it truly is as complex, interesting, and thought-provoking as the title suggests. Essentially, it lives up to the hype. Before I get more into my thoughts on the game, this video will contain spoilers for the story and ending of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. You start the game playing as a man named Gustave. You begin in what appears to be a warped version of 18th century France. As you make your way through the town, you realize there is some sort of annual celebration called the Gamage occurring. People nearby are discussing a person called the Paintress and an expedition. Gustave seems to know what's going on, but you as the player are left in the dark. There is no opening exposition or anything like that to explain to you what is happening and what the world is like. To make things even more confusing, the world is so clearly different from our own, and you will probably have hundreds of questions after playing through the first 10 minutes. What is the Gamage? Who is the Paintress? Is that what France is supposed to look like? Why is the Eiffel Tower all bendy? And what's with the glowing number 34 in the distance? What I like about this is that the game doesn't directly tell you the answer to all these questions. By being observant and using context clues, you can answer many of these questions on your own. For example, one of the most prominent details of this world is the huge glowing 34 in the distance. 34 seems like a sort of random number, but if you've been paying close attention, you'll also notice a strange absence of any older people. In fact, Gustave seems to be one of the oldest people there, and he appears as a somewhat young adult. As the game progresses, the Gamage celebration continues and we see a huge female figure in the distance change the number from 34 to 33. As this occurs, we see several people fade away, all adults. At this point, it seems very obvious that every year that number in the distance is reduced by that person, who we can assume is the Paintress, and when that number reduces, everyone who is that age fades away. After this point, the game does make it more clear to you exactly what's happening, but I do love how the story is revealed to you, not through words or exposition, but through the natural events of the world. It is a great way to get a player hooked into the story and mysteries of this game using visual storytelling. A picture paints 1,000 words, and it sets a precedent for the player, where you now know to be observant and pay attention to the details of what's happening around you, as there are still many questions. As the game continues, we learn that every year an expedition of people is sent out to the mainland in an attempt to stop the Paintress from killing them off. And as the number has just reached 33, it is Gustave's turn to go on an expedition with all the other 33-year-olds. But also coming along is a 16-year-old girl named Maëlle, who Gustave has taken a somewhat parental role with. However, as soon as their ship reaches the mainland, the entire expedition is attacked by a man with gray hair. Several people are killed and Gustave barely escapes with his life. Just when all seems lost, Gustave comes across another surviving member of the expedition, Lune. Together they journey on and continue the expedition. They eventually make their way to find Maëlle, who has made allies with the mysterious faced figure. As the expedition continues, they also come across another survivor of the expedition, Ciel. Together, the group journeys through Lumiere with the goal of killing the Paintress and stopping the Gamage. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a turn-based RPG. However, it does a lot to differentiate itself from other games in the genre. You have a party of characters, each capable of learning unique moves. Each character has a different playstyle and a unique mechanic associated with them. For example, Gustave has Overdrive, which builds up, allowing him to unleash a powerful attack. Maëlle can switch forms from defensive, offensive, and virtuoso. Ciel has cards that apply and consume foretell, with both sun and moon phases. Lune has access to various elemental attacks that can capitalize on enemy weaknesses. Each character in the game has a distinct way to play them, and by strategically selecting the right moves, each party member can make a big difference in combat scenarios. You are also able to equip Pictos to a character which give them a slight buff or gameplay modifier. For example, some Pictos increase your critical hit chance while others increase your counteract damage. Speaking of counterattacks, one of the most notable gameplay mechanics is the parry and dodge system. When enemies attack, you have the ability to either dodge or parry them. Dodging offers a more generous timing window. Parrying, on the other hand, is much more difficult to pull off, but when done successfully, you enact a powerful counterattack on the enemy. Dodging and parrying is all about timing. Some enemies have straightforward attacks that are easily parried and predicted. Other enemies have strange timing and attack in multiple sequences that make predicting their attacks extremely difficult. If you want to beat this game, you really have to focus on memorizing the timing of certain enemies' attack patterns. I think this real-time dodging and parrying mechanic is a pretty interesting thing to include in a turn-based RPG. These types of games traditionally have no real-time mechanics and rely fully on the player's strategy. I really enjoyed dodging and parrying as it adds an element of physical skill rather than just pure strategy. I honestly think that when playing the game on a harder difficulties, you need both strategy and skill to survive, which in my opinion makes for a more full and immersive gameplay experience. Regarding the more traditional turn-based mechanics, I think they are also done quite well. There really are hundreds of builds you can create depending on your own personal inclination. With turn-based games, the metric I use to really determine whether the gameplay is good or not is a combination of depth and freedom. The gameplay of Clair Obscur certainly has a lot of depth. There are hundreds of Pictos and each character is unique with several different moves you can learn. Looking online, you can see people have used the depth of the gameplay mechanics to create builds that do damage in the millions. For reference, I beat the game on hard mode, and the most damage I was ever doing in a single turn was probably about 50,000. To me, that's a sign of a gameplay system that has a lot of depth. Another thing I want to mention is freedom, and here I'm not so sure the game has a lot of this. An example of a turn-based game with a lot of freedom in its gameplay would be Baldur's Gate 3. In Baldur's Gate 3, you have hundreds of options and variables to utilize. You think about positioning, turn order, the environment, synergy, and are able to use moves in unique and creative ways. This in turn gives you a huge amount of freedom to engage in encounters however you want. Of course, a game like Clair Obscur Expedition 33, which is heavily story-driven, may not necessarily be going for a lot of freedom in their gameplay. That may be the point, but I still think there could have been some improvements in how combat encounters worked. At a certain point, I could see combat encounters becoming boring once you've created a strong build and memorized enemies' attack patterns. You could experiment with new builds, but other than that, your options for mixing up gameplay are fairly limited. Overall, the gameplay is very strong. Not perfect necessarily, but it has a lot of depth and engages both your strategic mind and your physical skills. Although the gameplay is very good, it pales in comparison to the game's story. As your party continues on their merry way defeating enemies and growing in strength, they once again run into the old man. This time, he kills Gustav. However, a stranger jumps in and stops the old man from killing anyone else. This stranger joins the party and reveals his name is Verso. He tells the party that he and the old man named Renoir have been alive for over 100 years, somehow unaffected by the Gamage. Although the rest of the party is wary of Verso's true intentions, they have no choice but to trust him. As they continue towards their goal, a friend of Verso's, Minoko, also joins the group. The group grows closer and more steadfast in their goal of defeating the Paintress. Before reaching the Paintress, they face Renoir once again. It's also revealed that Renoir is actually Verso's father. Although the group feels somewhat betrayed by this fact, Verso convinces the group that this changes nothing with his motivations, and he still shares the same goal as the rest of the group. They eventually make their way to the monolith, where the Paintress is. Paintress is defeated, with great effort. The whole group celebrates, aside from Verso and Minoko, who both appear somewhat reserved, despite accomplishing their impossible goal. The group makes their way back to the city of Lumiere, to cheers and celebrations. The Paintress was finally no more. Once life seemed like fleeting sand in an hourglass, and now they had more years than they could have ever dreamed of, free to live a full life and die of old age. Unfortunately, all this was too good to be true. As the monolith crumbles, every citizen of Lumiere begins to fade away, regardless of their age. The screen fades to black. But the story is not yet over. We awaken in the past, this time as Maëlle, but her face appears burned and scarred. We learn her name is actually Alicia, and her brother Verso tragically died in a fire while saving her life. Alicia is part of the Desandre family. The Desandres have a unique ability to create painted worlds. Essentially, they can create realities on canvases that they can then live inside. Within the canvas, time works differently. What may seem like years in a canvas are only moments in the real world. We discover Alicia's mother Aline and her father Renoir are locked in a battle inside one of Verso's old canvases. Aline has been coping with the death of her son Verso by creating him and replicas of her entire family within Verso's old canvas. But staying in a canvas too long is extremely dangerous, and Renoir has been attempting to remove her from Verso's canvas so that he may destroy it and help their family move on from Verso's death. Alicia attempts to go into the canvas to help her father. However, she still doesn't have a full grasp on her abilities and gets sucked into the canvas and reborn as a creation of her mother Aline. So, we realize Maëlle is Alicia, and her mother Aline is the paintress. The Renoir and Verso we see in the canvas are both replicas created by Aline, aka the paintress, to help her cope with the death of the real Verso, her son. Everyone else in that world are also Aline's creations. Gustave, Lune, Ciel, and Monaco are all painted, not really real. This reveal hit me pretty hard when I first played the game. There are hints dropped many times throughout the game's story that something about the world isn't right. Although the idea of a fake world, kind of like the Matrix, isn't the most unique thing in the world, the game pulls it off in the most satisfying way possible. The fantastical elements of the world, Verso's sadness, and his conversations with Renoir all suggest that there is something much, much deeper going on. I think in hindsight it all seems so obvious. Verso at one point mentions his parents are painters. The main antagonist of the game is called the Paintress. Maëlle constantly has nightmares throughout the game of Renoir, Verso, and Alicia. The world even looks like a painting come to life, with the absurdist Eiffel Tower and abstract enemies. Verso means reverse. Even the word gommage is an art term derived from the French word gommer, which means to erase. The pieces were all there, and putting them together is extremely satisfying and makes for a very compelling twist. However, the story still doesn't end there. Maëlle, with her memories now returned, makes her way back into Verso's canvas. Although empty, Verso is still there, along with the real Renoir, who is in the process of destroying the canvas. Maëlle decides that she doesn't want the canvas to be destroyed, as the friends she made within the painted world are very real to her. Maëlle uses her paintress abilities to bring her friends Lune and Ciel back so that they can stop Renoir from destroying the canvas for good. The group then faces the real Renoir, who they ultimately defeat. Maëlle decides that despite the risks, she wants to stay in the canvas forever, as the moment she leaves, Renoir will likely permanently erase the canvas, causing her to lose Verso and her friends forever. Verso, on the other hand, urges Maëlle to let go and allow the canvas to be destroyed so that she can move on in the real world, and so that Verso can rest. The two both draw their weapons, resolve hardened, ready to fight for opposite ideals. The player is then given the choice to fight as Maëlle or Verso. Depending on who you choose, a different ending will play out. If you choose to play as Maëlle, after defeating Verso, you hear him beg her to unpaint him. However, in the epilogue, you see her in the future still living in Lumiere. We see Lune, Gustave, and Ciel all living happily. Maëlle has a content smile on her face. They are all there to watch Verso play the piano. As he walks in, the music cuts out and the colors fade. Verso has a grim expression on his face. His hands approach the keys, but he hesitates, almost pulling his fingers back. It then cuts to Maëlle, whose face has contorted, appearing like that of the paintress. Verso's hands relax, and he begins playing the music. If you choose to play as Verso, we see him return to Lune and Ciel after defeating Maëlle. Ciel looks at Verso with acceptance as she fades away. Lune, on the other hand, looks disappointed and furious as she realizes that Verso has betrayed her once again. Verso then accepts his death with peace. We then cut to Alicia, with the rest of the Desandres leaving flowers on the real Verso's grave. Her father and mother embrace. Alicia remembers all her friends from the painted world and imagines them fading away as she stands there alone. These endings are the absolute best part of the game, and the reason it's stuck in my head for as long as it has. The story and gameplay are both very good, but this ending takes things to a whole new level. If the story and gameplay are like great paintings, skillfully made and thoughtfully composed, then the game's ending choices are like the Mona Lisa. What I like the most is how both endings feel like both the wrong and the right choice. Earlier in the game, Renoir laments how life has forced their family to make cruel choices.
Life keeps forcing cruel choices. We do what we must.
A major theme of the game are the cruel choices that characters have to make due to grief and loss. Gustave sacrificing his life, Renoir fighting Aline, and Maëlle giving up her real life for a painted world. This ending follows that motif, a very cruel choice. But this time, you, the player, are the one making the choice. This allows you to relate with the characters and narrative of the story on a much more personal level. Whether you side with Verso or Maëlle, you will feel sad. By siding with Maëlle, you strip Verso of his autonomy, essentially condemning him to a life of enslavement and robbing him of finding true peace. Not to mention adding further tragedy to the Desandre family. stripping them of another beloved family member, twisting the knife in an already raw wound. But you save the people of the painted world, people Mael has grown close with, people who had families, friends, and who were seemingly conscious and just as real as anyone else. Siding with Verso, on the other hand, allows him to rest, finally find peace, and allow the DeSandre family to move on and possibly heal from the tragedies they have faced. But by doing so, you sentence all the creations of the painted world. At first, it's easy to dismiss them as fake, but their lives are as deep and meaningful as those living in the so-called real world. But more than that, you betray your friends, Lune and Ciel, who desperately wanted to live, people you traveled with, shared your deepest secrets, and who trusted you to help them save their loved ones. This fact is made obvious by Lune's icy expression when she realizes Verso's betrayal. Additionally, choosing Verso forces Alicia to live in the real world, where her body is crippled and face burned, with no guarantee her family will ever be able to truly move on. Both choices can feel right or wrong depending on your disposition. What choice would you make? And which is the good ending and which is the bad ending? Unfortunately, it's just not that simple, and that's exactly the point. The game is titled Clair Obscur, clair meaning light, obscur meaning dark. Clair Obscur is an artistic technique where light and dark are used to develop form, create depth, and provide contrast in paintings. The game develops on this concept in the final fight between Mael and Verso, where Mael is in white and Verso is in black. Additionally, each choice has positives and negatives, lights and darks. Each choice is, in a way, its own painting, using Clair Obscur to create a complex and emotional visage. Both choices are wrong and both are right, because with Clair Obscur, lights and darks are both used to create a whole painting. The contrast present in each choice makes it so that you can't take the easy way out. You have to consider the ramifications of each choice and live with those consequences, both the positive ones and the negatives. And through this, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 becomes more than just a game about art. It becomes art itself. With a game like this, no detail can be overlooked. One thing that always bothered me while playing was, why the number 33? Surely it isn't some arbitrary choice. 33 seems like kind of a random number at first. But if you are religious, particularly of the Christian faith, you probably already know the significance of the number 33. Although not necessarily factual, it's traditionally seen as the age Jesus was when he died. 3 is of course an important number in the Bible due to the Holy Trinity, Jesus resurrecting after 3 days, and countless other examples. At first it may seem like kind of a stretch relating a video game to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, but just hear me out. Firstly, like Jesus, the characters in the game are destined to die at the age of 33. There are also themes of resurrection as characters are brought back to life, not just Verso, but even the citizens of Lumiere. Additionally, the death of Jesus Christ is seen as important due to the sacrificial nature of it. The game also has heavy themes of sacrifice throughout. Real Verso dying in the fire to save Alicia, Mael sacrificing herself to save the painted world, and Painted Verso sacrificing the painted world to allow the DeSandre family a chance at redemption and healing. Finally, Jesus Christ also has deep connections to art and painting. He is arguably the most painted figure of all time, and many of the world's most well-known and admired paintings feature Jesus Christ and other religious imagery. All in all, I believe the reason the game chose 33 specifically as the number in the game's title was to allude to Jesus and the associated themes. I truly consider this game to be an amazing work of art, and this is quite rare for a video game. I think video games certainly can be considered art, but most aren't made with that intention purely in mind, and even less succeed in creating an experience that I would truly define as art. From the way the game uses visual storytelling, the beauty of the art design, the way every detail reinforces central themes, the thought-compelling nature of the narrative, to that complex choice at the end, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 truly feels like a masterpiece of a painting turned into a video game. So you know what, French people? You guys aren't half bad. I'm still never eating escargot though.